if the press conference goes in a certain direction. And I think particularly with the backdrop of Keir Starmer in trouble and the departure of Peter Mandelson, even if Trump is trying to be helpful, I just think this is potentially going to be a high-risk press conference.
Now, Donald Trump touches down in the UK later today for his state visit. The 3-day event will be full of pomp and pageantry, but Sir Keir Starmer is looking to secure new agreements on business and trade too. In the last half hour, President Trump has been speaking ahead of leaving for the UK.
Well, my relationship is very good with the UK, and Charles, as you know, who's now king, is my friend. And it's the first time this has ever happened where somebody was honored twice, so it's a great honor. And this one's at Windsor. They've never used Windsor Castle for this before. They used Buckingham Palace. And I don't want to say one's better than the other, but they say Windsor Castle is the ultimate, right? So it's going to be nice. But basically, I'm there also on trade. They want to see if they can refine the trade deal a little bit. We made a deal, and it's a great deal. And I'm into helping them. Our country is doing very well. We've never done this well. We're having trillions of dollars coming because of the tariffs. They'd like to see if they could get a little bit better deal. So we'll talk to them. But primarily it's to be with Prince Charles and Camilla. They're friends of mine for a long time, long before he was king. And it's an honor to have him as king. And, you know, I think he represents the country so well. I've watched. He's such an elegant gentleman, and he represents the country so well.
Well, I'm sure between friends, the king won't mind that Donald Trump has demoted him to Prince Charles. He is, of course, His Majesty the King. Well, I'm delighted to say the Times' Washington editor, Katy Balls, joins me now. Welcome, Katy.
Thanks for having me.
How does it feel to be back in the motherland?
Familiar.
That's not ringing endorsement.
It's not really, is it?
Less sun.
Right, well, yeah, sorry about that. Katy, tell me, how different is the atmosphere here versus Washington about this state visit? Is there much hype in the States about it?
There is some hype in the States about it. In a way, I'm interested to know how much hype there is here from the general public. But certainly when you speak to figures in the administration or Republicans, for some time now, they've been saying how much the president has looked forward to this. And they see it as an event that is almost entirely positive, partly because we know that Donald Trump is so animated by his love of the monarchy, something that he inherited in many ways from his mother, who grew up in the Outer Hebrides. And I think there is just a sense of, which is partly, of course, why Keir Starmer offered it, that they like this idea that we just heard from Donald Trump, that he is the first president to have 2 state visits. And I think that is a badge of honour.
What do we think is on the agenda in terms of the politics of it? I mean, we know we're going to see lots of soldiers and horses and fly past. We're going to see a lot of silverware in St George's Hall tomorrow. But what's really on the agenda? What are the objectives? Well,
the tricky thing is, I think the thing that Donald Trump and the White House want is what happens tomorrow, which is, to your point, the pomp, the ceremony, the access to the royals.
We lay that on thick.
Exactly. And then the day that the UK government won, or the UK side generally won, is the Thursday, when it's more, can we do some deals? Can we improve, for example, the UK-US trade deal? What about steel tariffs? What about general investment to the UK? And I think there's still, we've had some announcements so far. There are some details missing from those. But I think the big question is, does the charm offensive, which I think you can say Keir Starmer was smart to do in his first visit to Washington, D.C. to really, give that big presentation, does it lead to the tangible results, which the UK government hopes they get from, in many ways, flattering Donald Trump, playing his game and so forth?
Do you think Keir Starmer and Donald Trump are fully aligned in terms of what they both want to get out of this, or might there be issues where they're slightly at odds with each other?
Well, I think there's lots of issues where they're at odds with each other, and then I also think there are issues where there might be a negotiation. So, for example, I think there are topics on this visit that if they come up, they're probably just awkward.
What? Like freedom, like free speech?
Freedom of speech. I don't think there is a tangible policy goal. Now, the US side might say we want it to be easier for the US tech giants, but it's not so much a live, we think we can establish something that we can say as a state visit announcement. I also think that if you look at Palestine, statehood, that is an issue where the two sides disagree. Obviously talk that once Donald Trump has left the country, that might be when Keir Starmer wants to act more decisively. And then I think there's also Jeffrey Epstein, and you look at the departure of Peter Mandelson. I think something which has I don't think there's been a huge backlash to it, but I think there's been a source of, it's left some people in Washington a bit perplexed as to why you would change ambassador so soon before a visit. I think that could also be an awkward topic. And then also Nigel Farage. On policy goals, I think we know where we're at. It is about trade, it's about tariffs. The UK side would like to keep having a negotiation about that UK-US trade deal, whereas when you speak to people on the US side, they're much more of the view it's basically all done. Perhaps there's a few tweaks around the edges. So how much do the US feel incentivized to go a bit further to keep the UK happy?
Well, I mean, all of those issues that you just mentioned just there, none of that's going to be on the agenda tomorrow officially. Tomorrow, everyone's going to be polite. It's going to be hosting with the most. Everything will go Donald Trump's way. It'll look picture perfect. When the circus rolls from Windsor to Chequers on Thursday, how spicy could that press conference get? You've got all the packs from both sides of the ponds there. There are so many questions and controversies that could come up.
Yeah, potentially very spicy. I mean, we just need to think back to the first state visit. And that was uncomfortable for Theresa May. You had Donald Trump give an interview to this stable, I think it was the Sun interview specifically, complimenting Boris Johnson. You speak to figures who were working on the state visit at that time, and they recall how it broke during the state banquet. And everyone wasn't quite sure what to say. It's meant to be this beautiful moment, and all of a sudden you have a Prime Minister under fire from the guest president. I do think this time around, and I think generally speaking, though there are exceptions if you think about Oval Office bouts, but when Donald Trump has been to the UK, so for example in Turnberry, he was generally at pains to be very positive about Keir Starmer. Now, he did also say the UK and the EU had a problem on immigration. I think if certain topics come up, he's going to speak freely on it. I just don't think he's coming here necessarily with the agenda to cause trouble. It doesn't mean he's not going to if the press conference goes in a certain direction. And I think particularly with the backdrop of Keir Starmer in trouble and the departure of Peter Mandelson, even if Trump is trying to be helpful, I just think this is potentially going to be a high-risk press conference.
Yeah, because you never really know what he's going to say, do you? It's been very carefully choreographed, hasn't it, to keep President Trump away from possible protests. And there are protests that seem to want to gather pace, but it's hard to know exactly where they would be now. Do you think that will cut through at all?
I feel the first state visit, it just felt a little bit more visceral in terms of the protests and the feeling against. And that's not to say there won't be protests, but there's a few things that make it harder to do. So Buckingham Palace, of course, renovations, so is at Windsor Castle. Already, you are further out. It is not so easy. So you hear about protests potentially in Parliament Square, but the president's not going to see them.
He won't see them. Yeah.
Exactly, right? So it just takes the temperature down a little bit. And then I also think the fact that we are conveniently, one might say, in a conference recess. So Donald Trump is not addressing Parliament. So not just the protests that could have gathered outside Parliament, but the protests from MPs themselves saying he shouldn't speak. They managed to avoid that. So I think the fact it is so carefully contained means that's probably not going to be, the biggest dynamic coming out of this. I still think Thursday is probably the day to watch. I remember speaking to someone, the diplomatic side, and I said, what are you looking forward to about the state visit that's coming? They said, Wednesday is going to be great. Why? Because it's mainly pictures.
Well, I'm sure the king won't mind that it's mainly pictures this time. He does seem to be bringing some of his tech bros with him too. The tech bros who, at the inauguration were all kissing the ring, having seemingly jumped from one team to the other. Who's coming with him?
So Sam Altman, we're expecting some of the big firms, and I think when you think about the level of wealth in this delegation in terms of billionaires and so forth, it obviously chimes with the tech partnership that we have had trailed quite heavily, and that was something that Peter Mandelson has been pushing for months now.
He's not going to get to see it through.
He's not going to get to see it through, but this I think is one of the Mandelson things that they're working with behind the scenes for some time. We still don't have figures though on some of these investments, so we're hearing lots of money pouring in, but we haven't had all the specifics. But probably I don't think we can underestimate it in the sense that if we think where the UK could succeed in the future as an industry of the future, the fact they're going to be here is a positive. Of course, no Elon Musk since he fell out with Donald Trump.
Well, he's been on our screens.
Yes, he instead dials in when appropriate, in his view. But I think this is probably, on the UK side at least, I think this is seen as one of the quite positive things about his visit.
What are the rumours about who might replace Peter Mandelson like in Washington?
So,
fun fact, before you answer.
Oh, no, please.
The interim ambassador, James Roscoe, used to be the Queen's press secretary. I know him well. He's coming to town instead of Mandy.
OK. Is he any good?
He's very good. But I think, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, I think he's very good, but they'll want a big beast who's done more sort of ambassadorial jobs than James has, I think, for that role.
I think potentially, in DC it has become, people will tell you something definitively, just as they will tell you in Westminster. There are some similarities in my old job and my new job. And she thought, is it just the same thing, saying it to 8 people? But there are lots of names in the frame. And I think the question is, Keir Starmer and his team, particularly Morgan McSweeney, wanted to do a political appointment the last time around. And they went for Peter Mandelson. And the idea was unconventional administration, that's the best way to get in. Have they been stung so much from doing that actually you go much more for an establishment candidate? And that's not completely clear. I mean, lots of people are talking about Dame Karen Pierce, who, of course, was the predecessor to
Trump
Peter
really
Mandleson.
liked, didn't he?
Yeah, she had really good contacts for, someone who'd been in the civil service a long time with the Trump administration. Her leaving party was attended by senior members of the Trump campaign. So I think in DC, I had lots of excited messages of saying, could we get Karen back from Republicans? She was seen as very good at throwing a party, if I'm being honest, as well as doing her job. Maybe the job is a combination of both. But then you also are hearing more about kind of, could it be career diplomats? Could it be, former intelligence heads? Could it be someone like Mark Sedwill?
Wasn't there chat that George Osborne was in the running?
Yeah, and I think
last time around
he was in the running the last time around. Though I think that if you are Keir Starmer, and one of the reasons he felt he had no choice but to axe Peter Mandelson was this sense that the Parliamentary Labour Party would not wear it, and you were going to have, particularly I think they thought lots of female MPs were going to come out and say that we cannot tolerate this. Is bringing what many in Labour see as the austerity chancellor over to DC. I think it would just be politically risky at a time when Keir Starmer's probably trying to avoid political risk. So some of those quite creative hires they were considering the first time around might just be the case that over a year in, Keir Starmer's no longer, and he's no longer in a place of authority to do that. So we could get a much more traditional ambassador.
One of our colleagues told me yesterday that Bear Grylls was at one point in the running.
Bear Grylls?
Yes.
Gosh.
Yeah, I did hear that rumour.
Because he was a buddy of Obama's, wasn't he? They went hiking together.
Yes, and also I think his faith means that he does know some people within the Make America Great Again movement. Gosh. So perhaps that was a factor when they were considering it. But certainly I think that figures in the Foreign Office who tend to like it if it's more one of their own anyway are perhaps seeing the recent turmoil as a reason to argue the case stronger for going back to the good old ways.
Well, one thing's for sure, it's not going to be Delphi, is it?
It's not going to be dull. It's not going to be Bear Grylls. My money's on Ray Mears. Can I ask a very civilian question of you, Katy? When you get to that kind of a press conference, who decides the pecking order, and how does it work with who gets to ask what?
So it really depends. And I think with Donald Trump, it's very hard to predict, as you might be able to appreciate. Ultimately, at least in the White House press briefing room, whether it is Caroline Leavitt, his spokeswoman, or Donald Trump giving a press conference, it's really just who he picks. Now, often when you have these more formal press conferences, you do get a sense of slightly teeing up in advance who they think, is going to ask the most appropriate question for the agenda. I think with Donald Trump, he's harder to contain or control like that. So perhaps it's just catching his eye, wearing the right outfit. There was one UK journalist who once wore tartan to one of these, and she did get picked. So what can you do to make the president want to speak to you?
See you in your kilt at Windsor, Katy.
You'll see us all competing.
Yeah. So Katy is the one with the I Heart Trump t-shirt on.
and the kilt.
I've got my cap. No, that's a joke.
That's the Times' Washington editor, Katy Balls. Thank you so much for joining us with all your Washington insight. And you can follow all the developments of Trump's state visit right here on Times Radio. We'll be broadcasting from Windsor tomorrow. Callum MacDonald will be there, and Rosie Wright will be reporting from the protests. Trump heads to Chequers on Thursday to meet Sir Keir Starmer for that spicy presser. And our political editor, Anna Mihailova, will bring you all the latest from there. And Kate Mansi and I will also be hosting a special episode of the Royals podcast from Windsor this week too. So stay across Donald Trump's state visit all this week on Times Radio.